Hello everyone, this is AJ. Welcome back to the channel. I thought I'd have a little discussion with you today on the negative effects of the MCU. Yes, so without any further ado, let's get into this. Okay, so yeah, we're going to talk about the MCU here and what I perceive to be the negative effects of it. Now, a little bit of history on me. Now, I've read Marvel Comics from about the age of 12, so I've been reading since the mid-80s. I've been collecting comics since then as well. I used to take myself up into London's West End. I used to go to Forbidden Planet up there. I used to go to Gosh Comics, the Comic Showcase. The Virgin store had their own comic store. Jonathan Ross had a comic store down a bit further up, just off of Oxford Street. There was a load of comic shops up there. I used to visit them all weekly, and I'd come home with comics and I'd enjoy reading them, you know, all this sort of thing. I'd read Marvel, DC, Image, Valiant, Dark Horse, you know, a whole wealth of them. I have boxes and boxes of comics stored away. I mean, I've got loads and loads. So for me, back in the day then, you know, I loved any comic book films that we got. I remember when The Punisher first came out, the Dolph Lundgren one. I remember moving into the era of Blade and the X-Men when it all started to become very big and this sort of thing. We didn't have much before that beyond DC's titles, Superman and Batman. But yeah, so as a comic reader, back in the day, we used to imagine, you know, these sort of films that we're getting now, like the Avengers and all this sort of thing, they were like a pipe dream. They were something that could never happen because of the sheer cost of a film of that magnitude and this sort of thing. It was just beyond the realm of possibility with how special effects were back then and this sort of thing. So, you know, we used to have Wizard magazine. This was a magazine for comic collectors. It was an American magazine. It was about the same size as a comic book. It would come out monthly, and each month they would cast a movie in it. They would have like fan casting pages where they would take the X-Men or something like that, or an Avengers film, and they would cast them as you know, in their mind, so to speak, this sort of thing. Wonderful time. Obviously, like I just mentioned, we moved into an era where comic book films became big. Blade opened that door. The X-Men stepped up to it. Spider-Man stepped through it, and the rest is history, you know. And now we've got, bloody hell, we got comic book movies coming out every month from Marvel and DC. You know, it's a non-stop tirade of stuff that we're getting. Not to mention the stuff that we have on TV. You know, Marvel's in the game now. DC have been in the game on TV for years. You've got all the animated projects you get. There's so much of it, and it forms quite a huge part of my my film collection. Now, I love the MCU. I adore the MCU. I think it's the best thing since sliced bread. I think it's just fabulous. I'm a big fan of most of the films. There's not one film I really dislike and hate. I do have all the films. I watch the TV shows that are on Disney Plus. I've got figures, I've got statues, as you see behind me. It's, you know, I adore it. But that being said, there is a negative side to the MCU, and that's what I'm gonna go into today, and discuss. Now, I was there, like I said, I've been reading comics for across the course of, so I've been reading them through the 80s, I've gone back into the 70s and read stuff from the 70s, so I collected through the 80s, through the 90s, through the zeros, through the teens, and now into the 20s. So I've collected across 5 decades of years, you know, collecting comic books now. So yeah, you know, I know my stuff. Let's just put it like that. Now, when Marvel first came about, the MCU, shall we say, when Iron Man first came about, fantastic film, and you got that end scene that teased the Avengers. Oh my God, that was fantastic, you know, and to see it become a reality, and Marvel take their time and sow these seeds slowly throughout their films to build this bigger and bigger universe, making the next project believable in the project that came before, so to speak. You know, there was a bit of question as to whether Thor would work, because you've had Iron Man, which has been set in this sort of world of a technologically vast world, and you're stepping into, you know, you had Hulk obviously, but then when you step into Thor, you're stepping into the realm of gods and alien planets. How would this work and mix in and sort of mould with what we've seen before? And they made it work. They made it work, you know. And you've gone on to have, you know, Guardians of the Galaxy. You've had Ant-Man. You've had the Quantum Realm. You've had Doctor Strange, and it all works because Marvel, you know, the MCU, they're very, very clever with their writing. You know, case in point, the seeds for Doctor Strange were sowed in Ant-Man. In Ant-Man, you had, you know, a small amount of stuff set within this quantum realm, and that sort of eased you into the sort of visuals and the stuff that you'd be delving into deeper in Doctor Strange. And this is how they do it. They sprinkle these seeds until you get a much larger universe, and you've already accepted it because it's been sowed earlier on and this sort of thing. So very, very clever. Now, as the MCU have progressed, you know, I remember when the excitement that I felt when they announced the second Captain America film, The Winter Soldier. I was ecstatic, right? I was there when the Winter Soldier was created as a character. Bucky Barnes has been around all the time. He's been from the concept of Captain America 80 years ago. He was a character from then. But he was a character that was killed off, and he was a character that they deemed not ever possible to bring back into the comics. But Ed Brubaker, a writer on Captain America at the time, done the impossible, and he brought Bucky Barnes back. He brought him back as the Winter Soldier, and he created a cool character, a fantastically cool character, and still a relatively new character, and brought Bucky Barnes back into the fray in an exciting, believable, tangible way. It was, you know, they hit gold when they created Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier. Fantastic. He ain't a character that's been around for years. So there I was super excited. And then to hear that they were doing Captain America 3 Civil War, my mind blew. I was there for the comic books of Civil War. I've read the Civil War stuff before, obviously, Captain America, before this film was announced and all this sort of thing. Again, a relatively new, past 20 years sort of stuff. For me, that's new. Civil War, again, a fantastic storyline. Mark Miller, I believe, was the writer on that, if I'm not mistaken. and it blew me away. Okay, the film's pretty much nothing like the comics. It's very smaller scale, but nevertheless, fantastic. And then when they announced Thor Ragnarok, Thor Ragnarok with you know, delving into the Ragnarok storyline. Now, I'll be honest, Ragnarok isn't a storyline that I've read, because Thor isn't a comic that I've read often. I do find that sort of ilk of comic, that sort of sci-fi, when you're delving into gods and space, this sort of thing, I find it a harder read than the sort of your ground level heroes. So I'm more Punisher, Daredevil, Captain America, these sort of things, you know. Comics that I find closer, that I can relate with. I'm not knocking Thor or anything like that. He's had some great runs and this sort of thing, but for me, sci-fi, I get through TV more. Same with Guardians of the Galaxy, not really a comic I've ever really read, because it's sci-fi based, and I find it harder to get into. But yeah, so with Thor, and at the time of Thor, I was reading, at the time prior to when they announced Thor Ragnarok, they put in the Planet Hulk storyline. Now, I was reading Hulk at the time when they'd done the Planet Hulk storyline, and I was very aware of it, but I jumped off of the comic at the time. I read I was reading the Hulk in the lead up because it was a fantastic comic book at the time, really good, really well written, and I delved into the Illuminati stuff, which is the setup for Planet Hulk, the storyline where they turf the Illuminati, which are made up of the heads of heroes. So you've got Reed Richards, you've got Black Panther, you've got Charles Xavier, etc. All these Tony Stark, all these characters came together and they decided Hulk was too dangerous. Let's find him a nice planet up in space and send him to it where he can live out his life without any anger, because this is going to be a planet that's habitable and it's got flora and fauna on it, but it's got no people. It's got no alien races like that. Anything that will anger you as the Hulk. So you can live peacefully without this sort of thing. But they double-crossed him, so to speak, because he weren't aware this was going to happen. So they flung him out there. And his ship got thrown off course, and he ended up landing on the planet that he did. And thusly led into Planet Hulk, which was the gladiatorial games. Now, like I said, I stopped reading at this point, and I purposely stopped reading because this storyline was going to go over the course of a year. And like I said previously, I'm not into the sci-fi element of comic reading. So to take the Hulk and put him on an alien planet with aliens, alien creatures, this sort of thing was a bit sort of like, okay. Now, I knew what was going to happen. I knew that, obviously, eventually the Hulk was going to come back to Earth, because that's the way comics work, right? So I thought to myself, I'm going to stop reading at this stage. I'm going to come back on board with the Hulk returning to Earth. And thusly, he did return in a storyline called World War Hulk. This was a series, a shorter series, didn't last a year or that, so it lasted about 6 issues or something, in which the Hulk returned to Earth, but he brought so many aliens with him, and the gladiatorial games, and the thing, you know, remember in the film where Thor's got this thing on him that electrocutes him? That's from the comic books. They have things that control them, and Hulk comes back and he pits the heroes against one another. He essentially puts them into that gladiatorial arena. So I was back to reading the Hulk then. So I was very aware of World War Hulk, of Planet Hulk. So to find out that Planet Hulk had been included into that Thor film was wonderful. And like I said, I didn't read it, but I was very aware of it. And because sci-fi for me works on the screen, I was excited by this, especially at the prospect of a possibility of a World War Hulk storyline. Obviously, that never came to be, but the excitement was there because you didn't know what was coming at that point. So we're at a point in the MCU here where the films are drawing from the comic books. You know, they're going and finding all these fantastic stories that had been done, and they're developing them into films. Okay, loosely based and all this sort of thing, but as a comic collector, it's fantastic. Winter Soldier, Civil War, Planet Hulk, Ragnarok. Do you know what I mean? You're seeing these storylines being created on screen. So superb, super excited. Now, this is where the problem arises, right? Because what happens is with Marvel Comics now, Marvel Comics, they get to a point where they're looking at what's big on the screen, all right? And so thusly they're going, okay, so now we've got a Guardians of the Galaxy film come out, and the Guardian of the Galaxy has done big. We're going to produce loads of Guardians of the Galaxy comic books. Yeah, we're going to give Groot his own comic book with Rocket. We're going to give Star-Lord his own comic book. Gamora can have her own comic book. So all of a sudden, you've got the stalls, the comic book shops, flooded with comic books that are relevant to the film at the time. And from a business perspective, I understand this, right? Because Marvel Films is massive, right? Marvel Films is this. Comic book reading is this, right, in comparison. So to draw from your inspiration now from the films makes a certain sense from a business perspective, because you want to go after that audience. You want that film audience to be drawn into the comics. So what we'll do is we'll produce comics that are relevant to the films that are out at the time, the characters that might be appearing in them films or appearing on TV, whether it be the Netflix shows or Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., this sort of thing. We'll do comics based around them. We'll sort of follow the look and the style of the films so that it's easily consumable for anyone coming on board. Now, I go into comic book shops regularly still, and I talk to the people in there, and I ask them about the habits of people buying and this sort of thing, and whether the films have done them big business. And the films have done big business to a degree, right? But what you find is newer readers will come in, they'll stick around for maybe half a dozen issues, then they'll get bored and dwindle off, right? And now your Marvel series, they begin, they get cancelled after about 15, 16 issues for then a new series to begin, right? So as a comic book reader, what's happening for me is that I now can't read Marvel comics because, number one, because Marvel comics are not giving you fresh ideas. They're not giving you fantastic stuff. There are exceptions to the rule, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, for the majority, what you've got is you've got characters on screen and the comics are following suit with them. And so it's a very negative effect that the MCU has had on the comic book industry in this sense, or Marvel Comics to be precise. So as a reader, you're not getting the quality that you got before. And thusly, in turn, what's going to happen is that the film series are going to have nothing to draw inspiration from, because they've delved into their best and most fantastic stories, that now you're going to delve into stories that are freshly made up with no grounds of basis in anything, and you're not going to get the quality of what you're getting before. So it's just like kind of a vicious cycle, right? You're starting to see it now because you've got characters like Shang-Chi come into the mix. Now, I'm not saying Shang-Chi is a bad film or anything like this, and you've got Eternals that's just opened, and Eternals is, it's wavering. I haven't seen it yet. But it's wavering from what I can see and this sort of thing, and people are not very happy with it and all this sort of thing. And part of the reason is because you're creating these characters that are lesser known, and they haven't had storylines. They haven't had a definitive run. They've had runs of stories, but nothing definitive to actually draw from. Nothing over their existence as a comic book that you can say, blimey, Winter Soldier, they've done the Winter Soldier storyline, let's adapt that. No, they're just comic books with no... So you're going into a film and you're creating your own story with no real foundation from anything that's existed before. And you can see how this is going to have, down the line, this will have a negative turn of effects on the film series. That's inevitable, it's guaranteed. Just watch this space. I'm not saying that the drop in quality is going to be drastic, but there certainly will be one. So that's one of the negative effects of the MCU, the fact that the quality of the films and the drawing from the comic books has in turn then made the comic books draw from the film, and thusly stifled what the comic books are doing. I still read Marvel comic books, not very many, but I'm more drawn towards a series that they do that isn't based on anything that's in film. So a character like Darkhawk has just recently got his own series, and Moon Knight has begun again. So they're two titles that I'm reading. Darkhawk is a character from the 90s. He's never appeared in film. If we ever see him in film, well, who knows? Obviously, as you know, Moon Knight, we are getting a TV series, but that TV series hasn't come to be yet. We've seen nothing of it. We know nothing of it. So Moon Knight as a comic book is still at a stage where it's not affected by what's gone on screen and made them make it in that vein. So that's the negative effects of the MCU from my perspective, from a comic book collector's perspective. I'm not knocking the MCU, don't get me wrong, right? I love the MCU, I love the films. It's, fantastic. I hope I'm here to see them all. But from a comic collecting perspective, there's an alteration in what we're getting there. So, like I said, I don't read as many comics as I used to, that's for sure, and I don't collect as many comics as I used to. partly because of this reason, and also because of my superhero fix is actually coming from the screen now. So whereas before it wasn't, I was getting it from comics, and I love superhero stuff. So now that it's all on screen, you've got the vast array of like DC TV series, the Marvel TV series. It's like, well, that's my fix. So comic books, I'm more drawn towards stuff that isn't related to what I'm seeing on the screen. But anyway, so that was just my little chat, my little rant about the negative effect of the MCU from my perspective. You may differ, you may have a different opinion, and that's fine. Let me hear about it. Let me hear if you've watched this and you're still reading Marvel comics and you think they're fantastic. Let me know. Obviously, like I said, there are exceptions to the rule. I believe the recent run on the Hulk, the Immortal Hulk, was it? It's meant to be very good. I do have them. I haven't read them yet. I have the omnibus editions with the intent of reading because I've heard that they're meant to be very good. But again, the Hulk isn't really one that's got films of his own, and they are growing his character each time they put him into a film by altering him. But yeah, so anyway, this is AJ. Thank you for watching. Please consider hitting the subscribe button if you want to come back for more, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care all, and goodbye.